International Women's Day 2024. Invest in women. Accelerate progress. An unlikely choice and tough days saw this woman rise to the very top of her field. How did you get into the oil and gas field?
So interesting story. I grew up in Sangre Grande. Cocoa, coffee, nutmegs, not an oil well in sight. And actually, my mom and dad had a cocoa store on Eastern Main Road, and we even had a cocoa house behind our house. So not an oil well in sight, and DNA, not no oil in my DNA at all. But I like the earth sciences a lot, and I asked my mom to let me go and do geology. She wasn't happy. She said, teaching or pharmacy, that's it. But anyway, she relented, and I went to Mona, Jamaica, Niue, and I did geology. And in final year, there was an interview, and I got hired into Trinidad as a developmental geologist. So I did that for a while, and then the opportunity came to do my master's. So I left, and I did my master's in engineering. And then I also did a certificate in information management, because at that time, the computer systems were just exploding, and I wanted to learn. And when I came back to Petroleum at the time, with my master's and the certificate in information management, I went into a different role. I was in charge of the well information system, which is a database with 12,000 wells, and we were developing it at the time. And then actually, BP headhunted me from that role to do the same in BP. So I left there, and I went to BP to do that in the computer and information department in BP. And then as time progressed, I stayed for 2 years, and they realized in BP they wanted me back in the subsurface. So I went back and was in charge of the geologist and the reservoir engineers in a particular area in BP. And finally, I decided I wanted to go into operations. What operations is going out on the rigs, going out on the platforms, and understanding the operations and maintenance and managing those things, the fields, etc., and the plants. And I did that, and for the rest of my career, essentially, it was based in operations. And I ended my career really being somebody who understood and worked mostly in operations. So it's not a long, winding story, not a straight line at all, but from cocoa and coffee to oil.
What were some of the challenges you have had in your career as a woman in a male-dominated industry?
Think of these words. Have you ever heard of the words overt discrimination? Have you heard of microaggressions, sexual harassment, unconscious bias? Those words only came into being in the 1970s, 1980s. When I joined in the 1980s, it didn't reach Trinidad as yet, okay? So I experienced everything like that. So first, overt discrimination. So I got my employee contract, and there it said, men and their wives will have medicals. I say they make a mistake, or you just didn't change it. When I really realized it was men and the wives, not women and the husbands. You could believe that? It was true. So the women who joined me, not only me, we had to petition the union, petition the Petroleum management to change this. It took a while, but we got it changed. That was amazing. That was overt discrimination. And then, of course, I decided to get pregnant. Who told me to do that? And I could not get them to take me off of duty. So there I am, 6 weeks pregnant, on a rig with a horrible porta potty, trying to get my boss to take me off duty, because there was nothing like that at the time for women. And when I did come off, cut my salary by 15%. So that is what the overt discrimination was about. It was there. And we could have managed it, because you could put policies and procedures in place. But the other things, like unconscious bias, breastfeeding, I had to run, find an office that was empty, hide, express milk on lunchtime and all that kind of stuff. We had nothing for women at all in my day. And that was something maybe you could fix. But the unconscious bias was a big deal. I'll talk about sexual harassment first, actually. That word was nowhere in our employee handbook, but we really experienced it in a serious way, not only me. And all we had to do was maneuver around it, because we had no recourse. We couldn't go to the boss, we couldn't go to the management, nothing. Just run, okay? When you see that, it's like, a cartoon, see somebody running around a table. Here what? It was something very similar to that. And at 22 years old, I was that age, and the other people who joined, we didn't know how to handle it. It was rough. It was such an uneven playing field. Men got hired and promoted because of their potential. We got promoted because of our performance. Think of the difference. And that was in the 1980s. It was rough. And then also, I've been called every adjective known to womankind. But I have to say that these things shaped me, but they did not define me. And they actually liberated me. And I felt I was never a victim. I was able to fight through that and achieve my potential and where I wanted to go. They shaped me, never defined me. And I hope with young women, it will never define them. And I hope that what I'm talking about doesn't exist today, although I know it does, but hopefully a little bit less than what I had to fight through in my days, starting off in Petroleum. There were a lot of men, a lot of good men who helped me along the way. I didn't want to make it sound negative. You talked to me about challenges, and they did help me and mentored me along the way. So I have to say that as well. There were men, I had 3 major mentors who really supported me.
Any particular successes that stand out for you during your career?
So the first one is that we did get some kind of equality in Petroleum. And it wasn't only me, so shout out to the women who joined at the same time with me. We had to go through this. And I guess in Petroleum, I told you I was doing the database management, which I think I could still program, you know. But it still exists today. I went into Heritage and I was like, what? So 20-something years ago, when we made it, it still exists, the basis of it. You know, they might have upgraded, etc. But I could tell you when I went in there what tables there were and everything, because I was there when it was developed. So that was a highlight. The next one is I traveled all over the world and I worked all over the world. I think one that stands out in Alaska, because the day I landed was -70 with wind chill. I nearly died. But anyway, I survived that. And I had 3 jobs in the time I was there, and I was successful in all. I was an infrastructure manager who knew nothing about snowmobiles, okay, and snow blowers. I also was, the head of the office that was reorganized in Alaska completely into a new function, and I also was the area operations manager for the furthest north fields. But I was successful in that job, and then I moved on to be chief of staff in London for the head of the entire production division of BP. And I was in the center of all the major decision makings. But the best part of it is that I was a chief of staff. When I reached there, 20 black women called me for mentors. And then I realized I was the first black woman in that role. I was like, I never crossed my mind until I got 20 people asking me to be mentors, but I just couldn't handle it. So I went to my boss and I put my head on his desk and said, I have no more advice to give, you know. But we need somebody, because if 20 black women reaching out to me, partner, there is a lot of need inside of here. So that was my London experience. And then I came back as Chief Operating Officer in Atlantic, the first woman again, which I did not realize, because I don't think about that when I'm going into a job. I was thinking of 600 men, high hazard industry, plenty gas around. How do I manage this? And then afterwards I realized I'm the first woman. And then the last thing was the culmination, was CEO of Heritage. For me, it was a culmination, but it's also giving back. Because I started my role in Penal, and I ended my role coming back to Penal and Point Fortin, my career. So I felt a lot of, I really felt happy giving back. And I have to say, I hope that in doing what I did, I cracked the gas ceiling a little bit, so that other women coming in after me could, you know, really do it much easier than me and don't have to go through what I went through over the time.
How do you suggest girls and women get into the oil and gas field?
It's a very, very diverse industry. People think you have to be a geologist, an engineer, a driller. That's not true. It's an entire organization running a company. So there's everything from supply chain, you do supply chain, logistics, getting the boats in and out there. There is HR, of course. There's communications, big time, because of course if you have an oil spill, or if something good happens, you have to pull out the communications in the right way. And there's a special area called commercial and marketing, because you have to sell and market the oil and barter as necessary. So it is extremely interesting. So don't limit yourself thinking, I didn't do geology or the earth sciences or engineers. Anything that you do in the normal industry happens in the oil and gas industry. And you can get in there. They're graduate trainees. They hire young people out of the university. They also hire mature hires. And the thing about it is that you can move and change. And of course, you could go out. I mean, think about it, there's so many service industries that hire outside once you get a bit of experience here.
How do you think we can invest in women to accelerate their progress?
So in terms of investing in women, I think we really must level the playing field for women. We must do that. And when you look at the goals for the UN, there are many. But I think in Trinidad and Tobago, there are 3 goals that really make sense. The one is about the first one is about making sure that the education of the women. The second one is about their economic viability. And the third one is about reducing domestic violence. And I think all 3 of them are really merged. I am not the expert, but think about it. A lot of women fall through the cracks because they're either poor, they have teen pregnancy, then they go on to get a partner, they have children, they can't financially support themselves, they end up in situations of domestic violence. When you look at ALTA, right, which is the adult literacy, 70% of the people there are women. That means basic reading and arithmetic, as people say. This has fallen through the cracks. We have to do better than that. And when you look at LEND and MyPed, which are the 2 microfinancing areas of Atlantic and BP when I was there, right? Over 50% of women are looking to get into entrepreneurship. Because if you don't have the education and you have the skills, which I know a lot of people have, then you can do something. But you have to get financially secure so that you don't end up in situations of domestic violence where you cannot get out. The UN, right, says that in the Caribbean, we are the highest per capita in terms of gender violence. This is unacceptable. So I cannot say all the root causes, but education, getting women financially able, and one more thing, getting women on boards and in the management area to be able to accelerate growth. I checked the CSO, 20% only of women, in public companies, only 20% of the board members are women. What happened to the rest of us? Count us in, count us in. We deserve to be anywhere that decisions are making. We are 50% of the population. And in any country that does not harness 50% of the talent will fail, because you're losing 50% of your talent. Women are a resource that we are not really using.
Do you think it is important to celebrate International Women's Day annually?
I was reading the World Economic Forum information. In the Caribbean, it will take 57 years for gender parity. So for us to have the same salary as a man and the same job, 57 years. So we have 57 more years to celebrate International Women's Day, okay? Because not only that, we talk about what we have done, where we want to go to, and how we're going to get there. And every year when you change the theme, you allow women to think about those things. Where we come from, what we're going to get, what we need to do, and how we're going to get there, because we have 57 more years to go. And I hope by celebrating International Women's Day, we can reduce that 57 years to something that is more reasonable. Because in the 21st century in the Caribbean, you really think it's 57 more years before we get gender parity for men and women? I think that's a bit much. And I know everybody knows this saying, a man who forgets his history is what? Doomed to repeat it. So you have to remind people of where we are in terms of gender parity and how we want to move forward, and remind them over and over every year so we could cut down that 57 years.
Invest in women. Accelerate progress. The Office of the Parliament celebrates International Women's Day 2024.